One of the hardest things in life is to suffer disappointment, is to have an expectation of God and to feel as if God did not come through. Welcome back to another session on how to be lost. Now, we are nearly coming to the end of our study, looking at the very first sinners and Jesus's reaction and interactions with them, and all that teaches us on how to be lost. So we're going to pick up our story in verse 16. And the Bible says, "To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." Then to Adam he said, "Because you have heeded the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, You shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return." Verses 16 to 20 really, or verse 19 I should say, they introduce another principle of how to be lost, but in a very subtle way. As God moves in reverse to his judgment, to his investigation, this teaches us a whole bunch of different things prophetically, right? That his investigation starts with the spiritual leadership of his people on earth. And it ends with his spiritual leadership, those individuals, right, who were once closest to him. And in the middle, right, he's dealing with the serpent and the enemies of God. Now, as he comes to Adam and Eve, he then goes in reverse, right? He last investigated the woman before the serpent, and then he goes back to the woman to send this particular judgment and consequence, and then he goes to the man. The question here is why does God give judgments to the woman and to Adam? And he obviously explains, he says, "Because," in verse 17, "you heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, You shall not eat of it. This is the consequence." God has pronounced the ground to be cursed. He multiplied the sorrows, right, of this woman in childbearing. And he says all of this is a result of the mistake that they have made. Now, in the disobedience and in the consequences here, you say, why these consequences? Why would God send these particular judgments individually and specifically to both of them? Well, what we see here is the fact that God's judgments are always designed to be redemptive. They're always designed to bring us back to the reality of our condition and our nakedness before him without his intervention and salvation in our lives. But it is also a means by which it reminds us daily of our need and our dependence upon him. Now, my wife has delivered 4 children, so I definitely understand and have witnessed as much as a man can possibly understand the sorrow and the pain that comes in bearing children. And in that moment, I can't think of any other moment where my wife would cry for the Lord and really want to depend and pray for his grace than in those moments. Complete moments of weakness and helplessness and dependence upon Christ. And also as I come to the punishment on Adam and the consequence and the judgment that he sent to Adam, in the sweat of your face, you're going to till this ground. It's cursed for your sake. And this is what you're going to eat from it. And this is where you're going to work all the days of your life. He uses this exact same phrase when he's talking about the serpent. You're going to crawl on the dust all the days of your life. He says the same thing about Adam. And in this consequence was the entire experience until he dies was going to be a struggle. So this lets us know that adversity is allowed by God as a redemptive process, as a tool in his hands that he uses to restore us back to where he wants us to be. But the recognition is that many times in your life and in mine, we are resistant to the judgments of God and the difficulties that God has meant for our good, and we simply run away from them and begin to use these to question his character, his goodness, whether we should submit to his authority, and whether we should believe and trust his word. I have to tell you that One of the hardest things in life is to suffer disappointment, is to have an expectation of God and to feel as if God did not come through. We've all been there. We've all suffered that. We've all gone through that experience at one point or another in our journey with Jesus. But Jesus has always meant for the problems and the difficulties of life that we face to be for our good always. His thoughts are not about, here's a punishment just to give you a punishment. But you see, we can be lost simply by the fact that we are resisting the methods of discipline that God has brought into our lives to sanctify us and to bring us back to Him, which is a constant state of recognition of our nakedness without Him, a dependence upon Him, and a willingness to confess not only our need, but to fully embrace and accept our dependence upon the merits and the work of Jesus. I want you to ask yourself, how do you respond when difficulties come? How do you respond when challenges arise? Even though you're faithfully serving the Lord, you're taking your time with God every day, you're in prayer, you're studying His Word, you're actively serving and spreading the gospel. You're being a follower of Jesus, a faithful disciple. How do you respond when those difficulties arise? You see, there's something that is in us that makes us resistant to want to be dependent upon Jesus. It was Jesus who told the Israelites on the borders of the Promised Land. He says, do you know why I led you all this way? In Deuteronomy chapter 8, the very verse that Jesus quoted when He was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. He says, I led you this way to humble you, to see what was in your heart, and to teach you that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. This is a clear indication that God is saying, I don't always lead you on the easiest path, the most direct path to the Promised Land. I lead you on the path that's going to best prepare you to live in that land and to keep it. This is the very heart and nature of how many of us end up lost because we can't handle the path by which Jesus leads us. And that the path has thorns, it can be rough, it can be narrow, it can have problems, issues of money, issues of relationships, issues of health. And we're saying to ourselves, where is the Lord? And why should I continue to trust and depend upon Him? But let me tell you something. The best thing that can happen to you or I is to find ourselves in a situation where we see no other hope except for Jesus, where we see no other way out of the situation except for Jesus, where we are willing to submit to that discipline and to allow Him to guide and to lead our lives and to trust that God is not going to waste my pain. God is not going to waste my sorrow, but that God is going to overrule it in His providence and make it work together for good. This whole section ends when the Bible says Adam called his wife's name in verse 20, Eve, because she was the mother of all living. Eve means life. Now, after these judgments have come, Adam's not blaming his wife. Adam is not looking at her and saying, oh man, this is this is your fault and now we're divided up. He looks at his wife and he gives her a name, Eve, which means life or vibrant or living. That's why my youngest daughter's name is Ava, for the same exact reason. And he looks at his wife and he says, you are the source of all living, but she is also the means by which he will come, that seed that is going to crush the head of the serpent. And so Adam rejoices to give Eve this particular name, to recognize the position that she's going to hold, that the struggle is going to be to bring forth that seed that is ultimately going to deliver us from the head of the serpent. So please, as we come towards the end of our series and our sessions, I don't want this point to be missed. Yes, we can allow Him to justify us. We can trust Jesus and believe in the merits of His death, His sacrifice, His resurrection, and His high priestly ministry. But the daily life, all the days of our lives, can be filled with toil and sorrow and difficulty. But these are God's chosen agents for purifying us, as gold.